Your manager reacts to your small mistakes more harshly than to the repeated failures of the worst person on the team. You have watched this happen. You have felt it. You have never been able to explain it without sounding like you are making excuses for yourself. You are not. There is a mechanism behind this. It is consistent, it is predictable, and once you understand it, you will never misread a management reaction again. By the end of this video, you are going to understand the exact psychological reason your manager holds you to a higher standard than someone who consistently underperforms, and why this pattern will never change unless something specific shifts first. The place to start is with what a manager is actually doing when they respond to someone's performance. Most people assume a manager is comparing performance against a fixed standard, some objective measure of what the role requires. And when someone falls short of that standard, the manager reacts. When someone meets it, the manager is satisfied. That is not how it works. Managers do not compare people to a fixed standard. They compare people to the expectation they have built about that person specifically. And those expectations are set by history, by everything that person has done before, in every interaction, in every meeting, in every deadline either met or missed. This is called calibration, and it happens automatically without the manager consciously deciding to do it. Here's what that means in practice. Every time you deliver, every deadline hit, every problem solved quietly, every time you handled something without needing to be told, you raised the expectation your manager holds about you. Not formally, not in writing, but in the mental model they carry of who you are and what you do. And now that expectation is the baseline you are compared against, not the role, not some objective standard, you specifically as you have consistently performed. So when you make a small mistake, when you miss something, when something falls short, when a deadline slips even slightly, the reaction is not proportionate to the mistake itself. It is proportionate to the distance between the mistake and the expectation you set. You created an expectation of competence. This mistake violated that expectation, and violations of expectation trigger stronger reactions than confirmations of them every time. Now look at the other person. Every time they underdelivered, every missed deadline, every problem created, every time they needed to be managed through something, they lowered the expectation their manager holds about them. Not dramatically, gradually, over months, sometimes years. And now their baseline is lower. Not because the manager decided to lower their standards for this person, because the manager's internal model of this person has been calibrated repeatedly to expect less. So when they miss a deadline, again, the manager's reaction is not proportionate to the missed deadline. It is proportionate to the distance between the missed deadline and what the manager already expected from them, which is not much. So the distance is small. So the reaction is muted. You are being held to the standard you created. They are being held to the standard they created. And their standard is lower because the organization allowed it to become lower. This is not favoritism, it is calibration, and the system has no mechanism to correct it unless someone actively intervenes, which almost never happens, because the person who would need to intervene is the manager who has already adapted to the lower expectation. Here's the layer most people never reach, and the one that explains something even more frustrating than the patience itself. When you try to change this dynamic, when you push for accountability, when you raise the issue, when you ask why the standard is applied differently, you are not just asking a question, you are threatening something. A manager who has adapted to low performance from one person has built their workflow around that adaptation. They have reorganized their expectations, redistributed around the gap, learned to operate with this person as a known variable. The system is in equilibrium. When you demand that the equilibrium change, you are asking the manager to do work, to have a difficult conversation they have been successfully avoiding, to risk a confrontation that might not resolve cleanly, to potentially need to start a performance management process that will consume weeks of their time and might not result in the outcome they want. You wanted to solve a problem. They had already decided to live with it, and solving it officially is significantly more expensive than continuing to live with it, especially when you have been quietly compensating for it all along. So the response to your push for accountability is not agreement, it is resistance. Not because you are wrong, you are not wrong, but because you have created a disruption to an equilibrium the manager had no intention of disturbing. And here's the part that makes it land harder than it should. Because your own calibration has been high all along, and because you have been the person absorbing the gap, your push for accountability gets read as a problem, as difficulty, as inflexibility, as not being a team player, while the person you are pushing for accountability about gets read as a known quantity, tolerated, managed around. The person creating the disruption is you, not them. You were not wrong to expect the same standard to apply to everyone. You were not wrong to push back when it didn't. You were working from the assumption that performance is evaluated against an objective measure, and that measure applies equally. That is not the system you are in. The system you are in evaluates performance against individual history, and individual history is something that takes years to build and almost never gets reset from the inside. So what actually shifts a calibration? There are only two things that consistently reset a manager's expectation about a person. The first is a high visibility failure, one that creates a consequence the manager cannot absorb quietly, one that lands on someone above them, one that makes continuing to tolerate the performance more expensive than addressing it. Most underperformers are skilled, consciously or not, at failing in ways that stay below that threshold. The second is a change in the audience, a new manager who has no prior calibration about this person, who starts from a clean slate, who doesn't have years of adaptation built up. This is why the same person who was protected under one manager sometimes doesn't survive 3 months under the next one. The new manager sees the actual performance, not the adapted expectation, and what they see does not add up. This is also why people leave companies to grow, not because their company was bad, but because their company had already decided who they were and had calibrated around them and the people around them in ways that were never going to reset from the inside. A new organization has no prior expectation of you. You arrive with no history. The calibration starts from zero. And what you have actually built, the skills, the experience, the range, gets evaluated without the weight of every mistake you ever made in the last job pressing down on the starting point. The patience your manager shows that person is not about that person. It's about sunk cost. It's about adaptation. It's about an expectation that was allowed to drift so far from the standard that closing the gap would require more disruption than the manager is willing to accept. You are being held to the standard you created. They are being held to the standard they created. And their standard is lower because the organization allowed it to become lower. This is not favoritism, it is calibration, and the system has no mechanism to correct it unless someone actively intervenes, which almost never happens, because the person who would need to intervene is the manager who has already adapted to the lower expectation. This understanding doesn't make it fair, but it makes it legible, and legible is the first step to navigable. That's corporate GPS, the map they never handed you.